So, where did we leave off last week? We left off, William has arrived at the Boyne, and Schomburg and the rest of the generals have been called to a council of war. Okay? So, we know about the attack, what's going to happen, because they planned this last week. So, we'll go over it again. Okay? So, here we are. Here's the Battle of the Boyne site. Okay? So, we have 3 crossing points. So, here, Rosnaree, here at Old Bridge, up here, and over here at Dry Bridge. Okay? So that's the 3 that they talked about in the Council of War. Meinhard Schomburg, Schomburg's son, will be in charge of the cavalry, and he will cross over here at Rosnaree. This is the plan, to take the Williamite army across the Boyne and down to Rosnaree and hit the Jacobites in the flank down here. Okay? So basically William's plan is that 3-pronged attack. Okay? James, he makes preparations. He breaks the bridges at Slane, and he also garrisons 1,300 men in Drogheda. So the Williamites don't have it that easy to cross. Okay? The Williamite Artillery then is situated up here at the crossing on Old Bridge. There's Old Bridge, and there's the Williamite crossing, the Williamite Artillery, and they're on a plateau, so they control the area. The Jacobite artillery is further up on Dunor Hill over here. So the Jacobite artillery is up here on the hill of Dunor. Okay. So you can see this bend in the river is where the most of the action's going to be, okay? So, William, before the battle starts, the day before, he rides out with some of his officers, and they look around at the Jacobites, and they see the Jacobite positions, and they decide that they are going to stop, and then they'll have a bite to eat, okay? The Jacobite general in charge of the area, he sees this group of horsemen, and he brings up 2 cannons. And whilst William and his officers are lunching, the first cannonball is fired. And it will be something the size of this. This is a 2-pound cannonball. And it comes roaring across, and it hits one of William's aides, and it kills him. And it also kills a couple of horses. So William then gets up on his horse and his men, and they are about to ride off. When the second cannon is fired, the ball bounces off the river and hits William on the shoulder and bounces away. William is knocked off the horse. The Jacobites on the other side, they don't know who this is. They know it's a high-ranking member of the Williamite command. They rejoice. Then they see the panic. The officer sees the panic, and they think that it's William, and they think they've killed him. William then is taken to the back of this hill where they're lunching, and his wound is looked after. The ball has come in and it has grazed through the leather coat that he is wearing, and has got right through onto his skin, and has burned his skin, and has actually cut him open a little bit. One of the Ulster officers in the command takes off his hanky, or neckerchief, and they put this around the wound. So William isn't dead, but the Jacobites believe he's dead. And the Jacobite command thinks that they've killed him, and they send word back to France. And the next day, the message arrives in France. They have torchlight processions through France, and they fire guns off the top of the Bastille to celebrate William's death. William's not dead. In fact, what he said is, the ball came close, but not that close. So William, unfortunate thing is that some of the Williamite soldiers, they panic, and they see and they think that William is also dead. William then gets back up on his horse, mounts up, and marches round and trots around the regiments in the area, and he makes sure that everyone knows that he's not dead. So this brings up the morale of the men again. The Council of War, as I said, has been held. They've decided that the Williamite troops would all wear the easiest sprigs of green in their hats, because many of the uniforms, including this uniform here, this crimson, would be worn by the Jacobites also. So you needed to know who your enemy was. The Jacobites decide to put white paper in their hats. They would be like circular pieces of white paper would be in their hats. This is to signify supporting Louis XIV, and the white paper cockade is the French cockade at the time. The Williamites put in the sprigs of green. Okay, so that's okay saying that, but when you're fighting in a battle, you know, how long is it going to be before the sprig of green falls out of your hat or the white paper falls out of your hat? You know, and there was a lot of what we would call nowadays friendly fire incidents. Okay, anyway. William goes back to and has a night in the Mellifont Abbey, and the next day a doctor looks at the graze that William suffered, but he's okay. George Story, a local Ulster historian and man at the time, he sees that the ball missing the king as God's providence, and he says, I cannot take notice of a signal piece of providence in the preservation of the king's person, for wherever else it might have led to the end of the future, it would have been a fatal consequence to the army if this ball had have struck. So what he's saying is basically that if William had have died, it would have been fatal to the whole campaign. And it's true. It would, you know, William's command in the field and his sheer presence in the field. We'll talk about it later on. In fact, the year after William suffers with a ball hitting him, a Jacobite commander at the Battle of Aughrim, a man called the Marquis of St. Ruth, is hit by a cannonball in the side of the head and just kills him instantly. And the Jacobites lose the battle. So, is it God's providence? Well, we'll talk about it, because it's not the only incident that it happens in this whole battle. Anyway, the Williamite command then, they decide that the first men are going to leave around 5 o'clock in the morning. So this will be Meinhard Schomburg, and he will have 1,300 cavalry. And with him would be General Douglas, who will have 8,000 infantry. The cavalry will leave first, and they will move towards Rosnaree on the flank. Remember this move that we talk about? So this will be the move. The main Williamite force will leave, or the force of Meinhard Schomburg will leave and come right round the flank and try and cross over here at Rosnaree. Okay? The Jacobites haven't got anyone at Rosnaree. They don't believe Rosnaree is a problem. But then they start to see this movement of men and dust being kicked up. And we talked about it last week. There was some of the Williamite troopers would have carried logs on the back of the horses to kick up the dust. Because this is the whole thing. They're setting this trap for James. They're setting this trap for the Jacobite command. Are they going to fall for it? Then the 8,000 troops of Douglas will come behind Schomburg. So the Jacobite command see this movement and they decide they're going to do something. So they send O'Neill, one of the older officers in the Jacobite command, they send him and his 500 dragoons to hold the river, or the river crossing at Rosnaree. O'Neill, in full Irish chieftain's costume, decides that he's going to take on the Williamites at this crossing point. Forms his men up on the riverbank and they prepare for the Williamites coming. Basically then, the Williamite artillery open fire. And James is nearly killed actually in a cannon, when cannonballs are flying left, right and centre, and one strikes his command tent. Now he's not in the tent at the time, but the guard outside it is killed, and some of the tents are also destroyed. James then decides that they're going to set up defences, so they start building these trenches in and around the river, because they know that the Williamite attack's coming. But is this feint move that the Williamites are doing, does he believe that this is the main force? Well, eventually the Williamite Cavalry under Meinhard Schomburg reach Rosnaree, and the Jacobite dragoons start firing upon them. And the Williamite Guard dragoons, we talked about them last week, Eppinger's Black Dragoons, they decided they're going to cross the river along with the horse grenadiers of William's Guard. So these are the best Dutch cavalry, and they're crossing the river. O'Neill in his full costume comes down to the ford and starts firing upon them, takes out his sword and decides that he's going to kill them himself. A Williamite dragoon shoots at him, and O'Neill is fatally wounded. Although he doesn't die there and then, he dies 8 days later in Wexford. But the Williamites are across the river. Problem with Rosnaree is this movement across this part of the river. This whole area is flooded, and it's a bogland, and it really is useless. It's not going to play much in the battle. It's also full of hedgerows, and it's quite steep. So the Williamites, this massive force of Williamites, around about 9,000 men, have crossed over at Rosnaree. The Jacobites then see this and they move towards Rosnaree, and James panics and he sends a large percentage, around 18,000 of his men, towards Rosnaree. And this includes the French infantry, it includes the artillery. So there's nothing really left in this bowl at Old Bridge here. The only regiments are left of these guys here. This is the Irish Foot, and 7 battalions of them, and then the cavalry is here in Dunor. They have some very small artillery pieces, but nothing. The big artillery is going over here towards Rosnaree. Sorry, over here towards Rosnaree. Okay, so the main battle is going to take place here in this bowl. Okay, this is the Williamite force. It's a massive force of infantry and cavalry. Okay, and they will be led first by the 3 battalions of the Dutch Blue Guard. These are the men, the SAS of their day, the best soldiers in William's army. Okay, so William goes to their commander, his cousin, Count Solms, and he tells them to prepare for their march across the river. The Williamite Artillery opens up with a large barrage. So these cannonballs are coming across the river. These big boys, these are the 8-pounders. The 8-pounders, the 2-pounders are not going to be used here, but the 8-pounders, 16-pounders, and the 32-pounder, big cannonballs coming across the river, and they're smashing into the Jacobite line. So this infantry here are taking this fire. So this whole area, including the Old Bridge village itself, is taking all this fire. So the guns open up at 9 o'clock in the morning, and the barrage lasts for 1 hour. So I don't know how many cannonballs were fired, but a lot. Okay, and a lot of the Jacobite defences are destroyed in this. Then the 3 battalions of the Blue Guard form up, and their fifers and their drummers are playing that famous song Lily Bolero. We all know it. And they march into the river, and the grenadiers, they come forward first, and the grenadiers march into the river, and they have these, of course we talked about them, the grenades, and they get to the far bank of the river, and they see the Jacobites, and they throw their grenades, and they open fire with their muskets, and they prepare, and they push forward towards Old Bridge village. And the Jacobites, in response, this group of infantry here march towards the village here. So you have the Irish Guards here, you have the Earl of Antrim's regiment, and you have Bosselow's regiment. Well, the Irish Guards are the ones that march towards the village. These guys are kept here in reserve. And then in the village you have Clan Rickard's regiment, are all based around the village and in the chapel here. So the Blue Guard push forward and push forward. And this is at 10:30. They are basically in the outskirts of the village. Well, it's really a hamlet, Old Bridge. The three battalions are fighting their way through, and the Irish Guards are now on their flanks and they're firing at them. and the Blue Guard hold. And then the next thing is the Huguenot French. So the Huguenot French regiments here, they start crossing the river also here. And they are supporting the Blue Guard here. The Blue Guard by this time are here on the outskirts of the village. It's formed up into 3 battalions. So then the Huguenots cross over here and they form up here. And the Irish Guards are then on the flank and they start firing upon the Blue Guard and the Huguenots. So by 11 o'clock, the Blue Guard and the Huguenots are formed up and they're firing upon the Jacobites. They've lost about 100 men in this crossing of the river. The Jacobites have lost about 150. So it's not massive numbers of people that are dying here. Then on the hillside, William sees the Jacobite cavalry starting to amass. So the Jacobite cavalry up here on Donore Hill, they start coming down. And this is perfect land for them to fight on. It's full of lovely grassy hillside and it's easy for cavalry to move. So the cavalry charge, and these are some of the best cavalry in the whole of Europe, the Irish cavalry at this time, led by men like the Duke of Berwick, James's illegitimate son. And they would be in these are big heavy cavalry men, with these big heavy cavalry swords. And they would be coming down and they would be chopping down upon the infantry. But the infantry at this time, there's a new tactic that's formed. And we talked about these last week. And this is the bayonet. The bayonet is now part of the Dutch army and the Dutch army. So the Dutch army, the Dutch Blue Guard form up into a defensive position called a square. You can think about a square shape, okay? So you have these guys with these bayonets. You also have guys with pikes, the long pieces of wood with we're talking 18 feet long, some of them are, with a spike at the top. Then you have a thing called a spontoon, which the sergeants would have, which is a small pike. So these guys are forming and they're presenting these spears towards the Jacobite cavalry. And they form this defensive position and they hold and they hold. And the Jacobites are coming down and they're coming down with the swords and trying to beat down upon these men. They're also coming down and they're firing their pistols as well. But the Williamites hold. Now the pure Huguenots, they don't have these. And they don't have pikes. And they suffer very badly. And the Huguenot commander, Calamot, is there. Schomburg himself then crosses the river at this point. And he takes out his sword. And he points towards the Jacobites. And he says, "There are your oppressors." He says this to the Huguenots. "There are your oppressors. Now charge upon them." And he leads the cavalry forward. And in this thing, a Jacobite dragoon comes up behind him and shoots him in the back of the head. And Schomburg is dead. So Calamot's dead, Schomburg's dead. But the Blue Guard are holding. These 3 battalions of the Blue Guard are holding, but William can't see it. William looks down with his telescope and he sees his 3 guard regiments and he says, "My poor guards, my poor guards." He is so upset that these men are dying. But they're not. They're holding. They're holding and they're holding. The poor Huguenots are the ones who are suffering, and some of the regiments are decimated. So now, this is by 11:30. The Williamite, the Blue Guard are holding, and the cavalry are charging down upon them. William decides then that the next prong will be going in. So this is the Ulster men. So we have the Ulster regiments of Mitchelburns from Londonderry, St. John's from Londonderry, Hamilton's from Enniskillen, and Tiffin's from Enniskillen. And these regiments are going to cross here and across and support the Blue Guard again on this flank. So you have the 3 Ulster regiments now crossing the river. So the Huguenots here are already across. Now the Ulster regiments are going to cross. And now the English regiments, the British regiments, are going to cross. Okay, so this is a massive man. The Jacobites try their best, but the Williamites push. The Ulster men are pushing forward. The Enniskillens are pushing forward. Governor Walker of Londonderry marches in with the Londonderry men, and the Jacobite infantry under Bosselos fire upon them, and Walker is fatally wounded and killed. William himself doesn't think much of this with Walker, and he actually states that he shouldn't have been in the fighting. Richard Docherty mentions it in his book. He basically he says that basically Walker shouldn't have been where he was, because he didn't believe the clergy should be fighting. So William's not impressed by Walker anyway. So again, the Ulster men are marching forward and they're fighting and they're doing their bit. The Blue Guard are holding this cavalry back. The Huguenots, well, they're suffering badly, but they're still fighting on. They've lost some of their officers like Calamont and Schomburg, but they're fighting on. The Jacobites are trying their best. Antrims and Bosselos are firing upon the positions. And basically the battle is now in a balance. The Jacobites are holding. Their cavalry is doing a lot of damage to the Williamites, but they're being stretched and stretched and stretched and stretched. And William still has men to push into the battle. Rossnaree is a complete stalemate, as I say, and there's no point. This part of the battle, it's not playing any sort of role at all. Now William sees his opportunity. He takes the Danish infantry and the Dutch infantry under Württemberg, and they are further down the river, down here, and they are going to push across at this place here, which is called Yellow Island. So they're going to push across and push the Jacobites back. The real objective is to push them up to this area here, to Donore Hill, and push them back out, because their only escape route is through the river and back over here, way down here at the place called the River Nanny. So that's really what the Williamites are doing. They're pushing them out of Old Bridge, pushing them back. The guys over here, are doing nothing. They're standing around shouting at each other. But James isn't sending any of these men back to support this main attack. So the Dutch are crossing the river now. The English have crossed the river, and the Danes are crossed down here at Yellow Ford. So the Danish troops, they come across the worst part of the river, and some of the men, they have to lift their guns above their heads because the water is up to their necks. So they're completely soaking. They come out of the river, and their guard, we talked about, in this yellow uniform with the red cuffs, they come out and they see the Jacobites and they fire upon them, and then they charge in with them. And the Jacobites have only got one regiment of dragoons to try and push them back. So the Danes push across the river, and the Jacobite officer in charge of the dragoons, Dongan, is actually killed. He's killed here. So James, his army at Old Bridge is breaking. It's a breaking point. The Jacobite cavalry are doing their best. They're charging in. They're breaking into the infantry. They're doing their best. They're suffering so badly because the Williamites are in square, the Blue Guards in square. The rest of the infantry are firing upon them. They've got knives, they've got swords. The Jacobite cavalry are fighting so well that the reputation, they are the best in Europe, but they're small in number, and eventually their numbers are going down and down and down. And it says the Duke of Berwick is actually, that's James's cavalry officer, is thrown off his horse. He's trampled on by a horse, but he fights on. And out of 200 of his own men, of his own troop, of the Irish Horse Guards, there's only 16 left. So 200 men, now there's only 16, including Berwick. So the Jacobite cavalry have done what they can, but without support, without artillery, they're never going to do anything. So at 12:15, William leads the final attack. He mounts up on his horse. Now, what we're going to say, a lot of people find this controversial, okay? There's my King William on his white horse with his red coat. do people actually believe that's what William wore or William rode and what William looked like? Well, all we can tell you is that the accounts of the day say that he rode a brown horse and he was wearing a dark blue coat. Some people would actually say that he would have had armour on. Now, this is a famous picture of William with his armour on a black horse, but this isn't the Boyne. This is another campaign. So this whole thing, William on the white horse, it comes from a painting that was done after the Boyne by a man called Jan Week. And the whole thing of the white horse comes from the scriptures. Okay? Behold the white horse. It's meant to be, it's to do with chivalry, that the knight should always wear armour and also be on a white horse. We know William wouldn't have been on a white horse because he would have stood up like a sore thumb. Okay? And he would have been, every Jacobite gunner or every Jacobite soldier would see him as a target then. William didn't want this. William wanted to lead his men, but he also wanted some security as well. So he would have wore virtually everything that every other trooper wore. And we'll talk about this in a minute when he crosses the river. So William, he doesn't take his sword out at the start. At the start, he would have his marshal's baton, which is like a long piece of wood. And he took out the marshal's baton and he led the men across. And he was wearing a blue sash. This is a crimson sash. He wore a blue sash and the Order of the Garter here on his chest. So basically, that was what William looked like. Okay, white horse. If you want to believe it's a white horse, you believe it's a white horse. But historical facts state that it was a brown or a black horse. Okay. So the other thing is, we see this great picture here of him crossing the river, and he's in the river and the water's running around his feet. Never happened, friends. Not truly. What happened was he got halfway across the river and the horse gets stuck, really badly stuck in the mud. And he basically has to dismount. So he gets off the horse and he's in the mud. And he's not feeling great. In fact, he's having an asthma attack. So while he's hunched over, he's hunched over this bit of grass or whatever in the middle of the river. And this time the Jacobite dragoons are now firing upon his men. He's hunched over and he's down, and the next thing is there's a gun to the side of his head. A Williamite called McKinley, an Enniskillener, cocked the pistol. So he pulls I'll pull it back, you hear it, click, click, and he put it against the king's head. The king looks back at him and says, "Do you not know your friend?" And McKinley went, "Oh my lord, it's the king." He knew it was the king because he's wearing the Order of the Garter and the blue sash. So this is how we know that he wasn't wearing the red coat and the white horse and everything else, because McKinley didn't know who he was. Okay? So William then tells him that he's not feeling well. McKinley lifts the king up onto his shoulders, some people say in a piggyback style, and carried William across the dirty part of the river, the mud. McKinley was a big man, over probably about 6'5" or so, right across the other side of the river, and he dropped the king down gently and put him down and pulled the horse across. And then William mounts up, takes out his sword, and this is the famous picture of William. He wouldn't be wearing the red coat and he wouldn't be on the white horse, but yes, he would be drawn sword, the heavy boots, and the famous hat with the feathers in it. So he drew his sword, he looked back to the Enniskillens, who were the closest cavalry, and he asked their colonel to come forward. And what he said was, "I have heard much of your deeds. Now let me see something of you." So the Enniskilleners, with the king, cross over the river Boyne, and they meet the Jacobites. William charging forward with his sword out in front of him. This is the famous William of Orange. He is now leading his men from the front. Okay? He nearly gets killed again here. So we'll talk about the cannonball earlier on. We talked about the McKinley with the gun to the side of the king's head. Now, a Jacobite dragoon fires at him, and the ball hits his leg into these leather boots, these very heavy leather boots, and the ball takes the leather takes the main impact on the thing, and it doesn't hit the king at all. So this is the third time that he's nearly been killed, or he could have been killed. So William leads his men forward, and the morale of the men increases. The men of Ulster charging along with their king. Also the Scots charging in as well, because you have the Scottish regiments have crossed over with the English regiments. All the Dutch and the Danes are pushing forward, and there's the king pushing them forward as well. So the morale of the men is so much increased by this, and the Williamite army pushed the Jacobites right up onto Dunor Hill. The Jacobites fight bravely. They do fight bravely. And this is probably the bloodiest part of the battle, because the Williamites are pushing up this hill. The Jacobites are trying to push them back. The Williamites are pushing and pushing and pushing. So the king is there amongst the fighting, and he's fighting. William's there. James isn't. James is over in Rossnaree. So the Williamites are doing their best, and they're pushing these guys up this hill to Dunor, to this old broken down church. And this is where the Jacobites will have their last stand at the Battle of the Boyne. And that we'll talk about next week, because we're going to talk about the aftermath of the Boyne next week, and then what is going to happen next. Okay? Thanks for watching, as always. Anybody has any private messages or any questions they want to ask me, private message me. Okay? Let me know if there's anything that you want covered. As I said before, there's the books, okay? That's the book. So this is John Childs' Williamite Wars book, probably one of the best books ever written on the Williamite Wars. We have The Huguenot Soldiers by Matthew Glosier, The Lions of Judah, The Huguenot Soldiers of William of Orange, and The Glorious Revolution, The Lions of Judah, Matthew Glosier. Okay? Superb book on the Huguenots. Then we have the Battle of the Boyne book by Osprey, and the author of this is my friend Mike McKinley. Very, very good book. Has great illustrations in it. You can see some of the uniforms and stuff of the guys. That's the Jacobites. I'll show you the Williamites. You want to see. There's the Dutch Blue Guard we talked about earlier. There's the English regiment of John Hamners, and that's a Dutch regiment of the Brandenburgers, or the Prussians of Brandenburgers. And then we have the Danes. We talked about this straw yellow uniform. Okay, so great book, really good book. Highly recommend it. And the other ones that I use in this series, of course, is Richard Docherty's Williamite Wars. Superb book, a brilliant book, great quotes. Very good with quotes for George Story. The other one is a friend of mine, Irish historian called Patrick Lenihan, and that's his book, The Battle of the Boyne. Very good book as well. So these are the sources that I'm using. That's my map that I did myself. It's sort of childish, but it shows you what we're talking about. Listen, friends, thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you all again next week. Remember, support your NHS, and remember, we are the people, and always will be. Okay? Talk to you soon.